right. So once again, we get the Disney Gallery. Last year, we got several episodes. I think it was
Yeah,
eight episodes.
it was full 8
And
episodes, yeah.
they yeah. This time it's a little bit different, and we just get basically 1 hour, ish of behind the scenes look on season two. And I felt that this one was more your traditional looking behind the
Yeah,
scenes,
it felt
whereas the
yeah.
first season was more of a roundtable discussion. We
Right.
got to see a lot of those roundtable discussions
It felt more
along
like a
with
Blu-ray special feature or something like that, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what were your overall thoughts on the way they did it this time around?
I'm still good with the hour 1 episode thing. I think the way and we're going to get into this a little bit, but it was broken down almost by chapter. Like each chapter got like 8 minutes or so, you know, something like that.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the best way to do it. You know, I think it would have been maybe better
Mhm.
to touch on topics instead of actually, going chronologically through episodes. I think what that does with episodes is it gives them time to kind of showcase each director a little bit.
Mhm.
So I think that was maybe a reason to do that, so that you could make sure you touch on you know Peyton Reed, Bryce Dallas Howard, Carl Weathers, so that each one of those has a chance to talk. But I don't know. It seems to me like it left a little bit a little bit less time for things that I wanted to know more about. So
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, felt like I wanted a little bit more out of it than I got. And
yeah,
um yeah, I mean, but there's a lot of good stuff in here that we are going to talk about, but I would like to see hopefully they'll give us more of season 2,
right.
especially something that they left out entirely that we're going to get to at the end
Yeah,
of this segment. So stay tuned for that. Um but yeah, I mean, let's just run down through these chapters like they did in the documentary. So, but first off the top, Dave Filoni kind of said, I pulled this quote from Dave. He said, "I think in season one, once you set up what the show is, you're always open to having a little more fun, but still deepen the experience for the viewer and the character." So I think what we saw here was in season one, I think they really wanted to focus on the Mandalorian, the child, those main characters, and then in season two, they really opened things up a lot. And they went a bit larger in scale and everything, but they also opened up the world to these different characters that have inhabited Dave Filoni's Filoniverse that I keep calling it, and allowing those characters to come in as well. So I just thought that was an interesting quote, um, in the way that they did that in season two.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think Bob Iger kind of warned us about this. So, the scope of the show is going to be broadening and
Mhm.
introducing characters like this, spin-offs. So,
Yeah,
so yeah,
absolutely. So digging into chapter 9, John Favreau actually directed this episode, and do you know if this was the first episode he directed, Adam? Because that's
he
the way
directed last season too.
okay. I wasn't sure because the way he was talking about it made it seem like, for season
Yeah, he
1, he
did.
was really
I
in
mean,
that
maybe
executive producer
right. Maybe I was wrong
role.
about that, but I was pretty sure he directed at least one of
Yeah,
them.
let me
And
know
I'm
if you get
looking
a
down
if
through,
you
and
get
I
a
am
fact
wrong
check
about
on
that.
that.
Yeah, the fact check is that I'm wrong on that. So this is
Okay.
the actual first
Okay.
one he did direct. Yeah,
Yeah, so it was really cool getting to see him direct, and
yeah,
he mentioned that he really liked to interact with the actors more, but he also enjoys being a collaborator in that role as an executive producer, and working with the other directors and everything. So I think he likes both sides of that. And my my wife brought up a good point the other day. We were kind of talking about how Star Wars is in really good hands right now with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, and about the idea of them maybe even taking over Lucasfilm, or at least being the creative heads of Lucasfilm, which maybe they unofficially are. But she had also mentioned that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau really like to be in the thick of things. They like to be making the stories and directing and writing and doing all those things. So that was a pretty good point too. But
yeah. We kind of
I
talked
think
about
John,
that last
yeah.
year when there was those
Mhm.
rumors from, that Lucasfilm was maybe looking at a
Yeah.
three-headed monster uh,
Mhm.
to take over Lucasfilm once Kathleen Kennedy retires, or that type of stuff. Her
Right.
contract is up. That um,
Mhm.
and those two were two names that were part of that: Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, and the other one was Michelle Rejwan, I believe. Kind of
Yeah.
think a little bit more of the Kathleen Kennedy style behind the scenes stuff.
Mhm.
Jon and Dave might be
Yeah.
involved in story or in something like that. So
Well, I certainly trust whatever those 2 do because
yeah,
they've
yeah,
done a great job so far. And so they when we the big thing that we get in chapter 9 is the crate dragon.
yeah,
And they did kind of take inspiration from the bones that we see in A New Hope of a crate dragon, but
right,
really it's just the head and the neck, I guess. So they took those bones, basically looked at that, and then they built this crate dragon around that, and they had to kind of imagine what this might look like. And they wanted to go for this big scope and this big scale of this creature, and bring this epicness to it. And it went from, actually, it was originally like 100 feet 150 feet long, and eventually it ended up being like 600 feet long. And
yeah,
John Favreau just felt that that looks how it should look, you know what I mean, at
yeah,
that
yeah. I get
scale.
that.
So mhm.
And I think that the idea there, for the scale, especially when you put it in context with the bones that you see in A New Hope, because they do look different, as far as size goes. It looks quite
Mhm.
smaller. Um, and I think they kind of played with that in the episode too. About how it's at the scale with the Cobb Vanth lines at the scale, and
Yeah.
he only saw it from the neck up or something like that. I think he says something like that.
Right.
Um, but they also said, and I forget who said it, but they had mentioned about that as these creatures grow or mature or age, maybe they grow legs. So the one that we see in A New
Mhm.
Hope possibly died young. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I buy into that. I think that fits.
Yeah, and I mean, I just think it looked fantastic
Yeah,
in that episode. Like, I was so impressed by that thing. Um, just blown away. And they did talk a little bit, we were kind of wondering what more could they tell us about the volume and stagecraft and everything that we didn't know, but they were able to shoot with some lower light, darker scenes in the volume this time
yeah,
around.
they did expand it.
Um
Yeah, they
mhm.
they did upgrade. They did expand. It was I believe said a little bigger this year too.
Yeah, it was bigger,
Right.
and they could also, like, adjust the color and everything just with a dial on a tablet, basically.
Yeah, they were
Um,
adjusting the color, and even what the sky looked like, even in the art of the sky, they could
mhm,
change that
mhm,
and adjust that on the fly.
which I thought was just amazing.
Oh yeah, it's
Um,
mind blowing. Right.
yeah, the things you can do with lighting, because lighting's really everything.
Yeah.
Um And, one thing that we speculated on for this chapter back when we first saw it was some of that graffiti we see outside of that Fight Club
Hmm.
area.
Yep.
And it was definitely painted with the intention of it looking like graffiti and
Right.
everything, but
Right.
like just thinking of graffiti in Star Wars, and I thought that was just a cool concept.
Yeah, and they
Um,
brought in our graffiti artist David Cho for that, and he actually got a little
mhm,
cameo in the episode, which was neat.
yep,
Uh, but yeah, they put a lot of thought into that. Not just the scenes and the characters that show up in the graffiti, but where on the wall this stuff goes. So lower graffiti, they mentioned that maybe that was like Jawas painting it since they're tall. So
mhm,
um, the influences on that art and where it went on the wall thought out.
yeah, yeah, it was really
It's cool.
interesting
Yeah.
to take a deeper look at that. And John Favreau also talked about using several different genres with the Mandalorian. Samurai. He mentioned Western, heist, war. Gangster genre as well, with the mob boss that's in the Fight Club area. And of course, we get some horror in episode 10, or in chapter 10,
Yeah.
that
Right.
we're going to
Yep.
talk about next. So, um, chapter 10 was directed by Peyton Reed, and Peyton Reed got 2 episodes this
Yes.
season, this one and the finale. And I guess John Favreau wanted to create a distinct ice planet that wasn't Hoth. So they went for more of a glacier feel
Yeah.
than like necessarily like a snowy planet feel. Um, and and when we saw the trailer, we were speculating maybe that was Ilum, or maybe it wasn't, but
A
no,
lot of
it
people
was
went straight and
it,
thought Hoth, and that's what they said in the episode. See
right.
ice planets, and you think,
Hmm.
people are going to jump to Hoth, and that happened. See that in
Yep.
the trailer,
Yep.
and the two theories, like you mentioned, were Ilum or Hoth.
Hmm. Hmm. But you were like, but I remember you saying,
No,
Adam, you're like, but
yeah,
it might just be a whole new planet.
I did say
Um,
that.
yeah, you did say that,
Got a couple things right
and
this year.
yeah, you got that right. And of course, they used the Ralph McQuarrie painting of the Krykna spider that was
Yeah,
supposed to appear and live on Dagobah in The Empire Strikes Back. And, no idea is dead at Lucasfilm or Disney. So they brought that into the Mandalorian. And I think it
yeah.
actually fit quite well
I
into
think
this
it fits
episode.
better
So,
there than it
yeah.
would have on Dagobah, and that's what Doug Chang said was he thought
Hmm.
that it felt more like like an ice spider instead of something that would show up in a swamp like that. It had that
Yeah.
kind of more cold feel to it.
Agreed. Agreed. And this episode really touches on that horror genre. And Peyton Reed had said basically a lot of this episode basically has a guy in a helmet, a puppet, and a frog lady. So you're not getting like these human faces or these human expressions. You're building an episode around these characters where we don't really see a human face, and
Yeah, absolutely.
unless
Yep.
you're counting the New Republic. Um, um, I don't know what to call them. The New Republic guys. um, what's that new show coming out?
The Rangers.
Rangers. Let's
Yeah,
call them
there you
Rangers.
go.
Yeah, I don't know.
Cool.
The X-wing pilots,
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah. All right.
So yeah, and I guess actually the Frog Lady was played by Misty Rosas,
Yes.
who also played Queel,
Yep.
which I
She
thought was a
was.
fun fact.
Yeah, she was under
Mhm.
the costume for Quill. Yep.
Yeah, and it was a practical
Yeah.
costume.
hmm
For do we have any other name for her other than the Frog
I think
Lady?
she was
Adam, I
actually
keep
credited as Frog Lady, to be honest.
Frog Lady.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a practical costume, but then they also added some CG elements to it. And like when she was
Yeah.
leaping
Right.
around, like those elements were CG because I remember us talking about the fact that it was so hard to tell the difference between what was real and what wasn't real in this season. And
hmm
that was one of those things. And going into chapter 11, Bryce Dallas Howard says you want to shoot in a manner in which you'd have to shoot if it actually were real,
Yeah,
and then the audience believes it's real. So maybe that's the essence of why I couldn't tell
maybe.
if things were real or not
I
because
think
they
we'll get
shot
into
it,
that a little bit later.
treated it like it was all real.
Yeah, I think, and
Yeah.
I think the real essence of that we'll get into later when we talk about miniatures.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I don't know how much is Star Wars, a lot of it is fantasy, and so I know what she's saying, that it has to be grounded. Um,
Yes.
but I don't know. I think there's some liberties to take there. Me not being a director, but sitting in my chair in my basement
Mhm.
at home. I think there's some
Yep.
liberties you can take there with what's real. It,
I I mean, I if I'm thinking about it in a certain way, like the
like
issue I had with the prequels, is I could tell that things weren't real and it pulled me out of it. With the Mandalorian, like for me, just for me, everything because it feels grounded in reality, I believe in it more. So then even the things that aren't real, like the CG elements, like feel real because they're done so well. You know what I mean? Does that
I
make
think
sense?
a little bit. I think some of that is an extra 20 years of technology to help it feel
Hmm.
more grounded, more real.
Hmm.
I think that the stuff
Yeah.
that happens in the prequels, with these elaborate fights and force moves and all this other stuff, I think would feel a lot different today. You know,
Hmm.
Stuff
Hmm.
that obviously isn't real, couldn't happen, but I think it would look a lot different today.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. No
But
doubt about it.
but that's a
But
rabbit
yeah,
hole we don't need to get into.
Right. I will just say that I do like that they keep things grounded.
Oh, me
For
too. Me
me,
too.
I
Me
love
too.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just think that there's a little bit of wiggle room there.
Oh, yeah.
So,
No doubt. Definitely. And then, of course, in this chapter, we get Bo-Katan, we
yeah.
get, Katie Sackhoff returning to the role of Bo-Katan in live action, and I guess this is a cool story. Years ago, Dave Filoni told her, "You never know, maybe one day this character could live in live action or could be in live action."
Hmm.
Um, and then that kind of came true. So I think Katie Sackhoff was pleasantly surprised that that did
Yeah.
come true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought they just did a tremendous job of bringing that character into live action pretty much seamlessly, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then with chapter 12, we had Carl Weathers direct this one, and you could tell that he loved directing. And
Yeah. No, yeah.
we
For
didn't
sure.
get to see a whole lot of his character in this season, just in that one episode that he directed, really.
Yep.
Um, but it seems like he'd be interested in doing some more directing in the future.
Yeah, I think he actually
And
said as
yeah.
much in there, didn't he?
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
maybe he didn't actually mean for Star Wars or for this, but I'm sure he would,
Right, but
given the chance, he would. Yeah.
yeah, and he received a lot of compliments about his ability to direct the action scenes. I thought there was a lot of great action in this episode. Um, this is the one where they kind of infiltrate that Imperial base on Navarro,
Hmm.
and everything. I thought there was a lot of great action there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And speaking of Navarro itself, the set was rebuilt, so that it would give it kind of that different look now that it's been retaken and taken back from Moff Gideon and the Empire. So I thought that was cool as well. And then, they talked also about Gina Carano and, I don't know if I'm not sure if it was the stunt coordinator maybe or who it was, but just talking about using her physicality even more in this episode and in this season in general.
Yeah,
So,
and I mean
definitely,
that's
yeah.
yeah, that's beyond a shadow of a doubt what happened. You go more fight scenes with her, where she's just handling people and
Mhm.
letting that that MMA style um,
Yeah.
training and knowledge that she has take over. Kind of the same that they kind of almost let happen with Cosca Reeves and Sasha Banks or
Mhm.
Mercedes. I forget what she's credited, what name she's using there. Um,
Yeah.
but Mercedes something.
Mhm.
Kind of letting that whole training that they already know take over. They talked a little bit about that with Boba Fett and Tamir Morrison too.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll definitely get into
Right,
that in a
right.
little bit too. And I love the fact that she was able to even use one of her wrestling moves in the episode.
Yeah,
So that was pretty cool. Um, so yeah, yeah, good stuff there. And then, for me, this was when we moved into chapter 13 and Dave Filoni directed this one. This was the one with Ahsoka.
yeah,
Um, my interest was really peaked here.
yeah.
Because it's still my favorite episode of the season, right up there with the finale. I love both of those episodes
Hmm.
so much. And Dave Filoni started by saying everything in this episode is in the volume or on a stage or in a stage.
Which is
Um,
incredible.
so yeah, which is nuts to think about. And so it was important to give some kind of atmosphere and life
Hmm.
to these sets and inside the volume, because the environment was actually part of the story. And we talked about how, the contrast between like the desolate
Right.
environment on the outside and then kind of the way it is on the inside of that fortress. And Dave also talked about Kurosawa again and talked about the samurai influences on this in this episode. So we're gonna have to go back into Kurosawa maybe and look at the Mandalorian and some samurai stuff
Yeah,
in our next mythology, I think. Um,
yeah. Might have to.
and yeah, and speaking of that, Ahsoka's lightsabers are kind of similar to katanas, in the style of the hilt and everything like that, which is pretty neat.
Right.
I really I really like that. Um, and Pedro Pascal said that there is a lot of nuance, and he noticed even kind of some film art in this episode. And I'm thinking about some of those shots, like with Ahsoka in front of the moon,
For
holding
sure.
Grogu. Are there any other shots for you that kind of come to
Specific
mind when he's
shots,
talking
I'm
about
not. Yeah,
nuance and
yeah. I mean, specific shots, I'm not sure.
Mhm,
I take you. You already mentioned the contrast between inside and outside of the city. I thought that was a good
mhm,
film art
mhm,
aspect. I think you might be thinking of that a little bit. Um, I think just that garden in general, I thought was just a piece of art, and maybe it's just the set. I don't know, but just the whole atmosphere inside that. Not even just the contrast between inside and outside, but even just the way that inside looked was beautifully made, wonderfully made.
yeah, for sure. And I think I mentioned this when we reviewed this episode, but I just loved that dialogue was used minimally. There were some
Right?
very
Yeah. There's
quiet,
that. Yep.
kind of nuanced
Yep.
moments where it was all about expression and
There's also really that kind of samurai feel with Ahsoka, and the diving in and out of the fog, and that type of thing.
mhm,
That whole segment and sequence that was incredible.
yes. Yeah. And then even considering the showdown
Yeah.
um between Ahsoka and the trying to think of what her name was, the magistrate or something
Yeah. Yeah. She had a real
at
name,
the
but I
end.
forget it too.
Mhm. So this, is a beautifully done episode.
Yeah.
But Dave Filoni, he had some reservations. He had some
Yeah. Said he actually
reservations
wanted to do that
about
last
bringing
year. Or
Ahsoka.
thought about it last year.
Yeah. But he said he didn't want to mess
Yeah.
up Ahsoka
Right.
basically. And it was so important to them that they got this right. You could tell the care that went into this, and
Oh yeah.
Rosario Dawson did tons of research on the character,
Mm-hmm.
and um, they really wanted to get it right, and I think they did a fantastic job of bringing Ahsoka to life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I would totally agree. And Rosario nailed it. She did
mhm,
perfect. I had no complaints with Rosario. So
right,
yeah.
yeah, and that's good because we're gonna get a whole show with Ahsoka, so I'm glad they got it right.
Yeah.
Um, and the last thing I wanted to mention about this chapter was that George Lucas could be seen on set with Grogu, and I don't know if it was actually while they were filming this episode or not. Maybe because um, I think that he was seen in a picture with Rosario Dawson
Yeah,
as
not even
well.
just well, he was
As
yeah, he was in
so,
that episode. There was some
mhm,
video with him talking to Rosario and laughing and having a good time. Yeah.
yeah. So that just warms my heart.
Yeah.
um, anytime George Lucas is somewhat involved in Star Wars, I'm all about it. I've said that
Yeah.
before and I'll say it again. Um, and again, it just goes back to Dave and John have this real respect for what George did and what he created, and wanting to honor that. Um, you know. And then we get into chapter 14,
Yes.
Robert Rodriguez. And so he had a guitar on set.
I've watched that video probably 1,000 times.
So yeah, you're gonna have to tell me about this video because I haven't watched it
Oh,
yet.
it was from the episode. But
Oh,
he
okay.
actually Robert Rodriguez kind of pulled out that little clip of the episode and shared it on his socials, and it was just it's him jamming kind of this bluesy riff on his guitar, his acoustic
Hmm.
guitar, with Grogu the child just kind of sitting there, and then
Yeah.
the puppeteers are making him headbang along with the
Oh,
and it
okay.
was just
So
a
it was just a
so
clip from the
cool. Yeah,
episode
it was just
of
this
this.
really cool moment where Robert Rodriguez is just kind of hanging out and having a good time, and actually my daughter saw that video and she's like, is Baby Yoda real?" you know uh because she couldn't quite pick
Yes.
out that there's puppeteers doing that, but he's just it's just a fun it was just a really
Hmm.
fun you mentioned seeing George around warms your heart, and that this one warmed my heart, seeing Robert
Hmm.
Rodriguez and just having a great time on set, and Grogu having a good time too, so I thought that was wonderful.
Absolutely. And you could see his passion for Star
Yeah,
Wars and his
yeah.
love for the Boba Fett character. I mean, I think he
And
said
that's something
even that
that
Boba
that
was
has
his
come.
favorite character.
Yeah, and that's something that came up a lot in this episode is the passion, and we talked about that last year too. I remember talking about that with season 1 in Disney Gallery, but um, I I want to say it was Gina Carano talked about how everyone had that passion, gave it their all. Everyone from every department had that passion, and you can see it in stuff
Hmm.
like this.
Yeah. And John Favreau talks about that a lot with all the people that are involved in it and how important all those people are in working
Yeah,
together and what they can all bring to the
yeah.
table, whether it's the directors or actors or crew or whoever. Um, And Pedro Pascal had this to say about Robert Rodriguez. He said he brings this danger and grit into the episode while ushering in this iconic character with Boba Fett. So we do know Robert Rodriguez for having sort of those gritty,
Hmm.
dangerous feeling films and everything like that. Um, and we could see that in the action that's delivered by Boba Fett and the way that he just takes those
Yeah,
dudes out with that what is it called? Is it
the
a
gaffy
gaffy
stick.
stick or
Yeah,
yeah. Um, so there's definitely some grit in this episode and some
a little bit,
danger.
just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. And we talked about the Sarlacc pit earlier and
Hmm.
Boba Fett surviving that, and John and Dave really wanted to physically show that
Right.
with Boba's appearance and like the wear and tear on his armor and
Yeah.
everything like that. Um, See, I think I kinda missed that while I was watching the episodes, like, I knew he looked weird and everything, like, he
You
looked,
missed
like,
like the
messed up.
scarring and stuff.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I didn't really th c co consciously think, "Oh, that's because he was being digested for a little while." You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
no,
Like,
I
I
picked
didn't
up
put
on
those
that.
2 things together.
That was a detail that I did. I actually noticed. I mean, that was a detail I noticed in chapter 9. When he gets to the end
Mhm.
scene, and thinking that that's from the Sarlacc pit, but uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and seeing his armor that way too, I was that was on my mind then too. So, um,
Mhm.
but yeah, the scarred Boba Fett was super cool. So
Yeah. And, and yeah, I mean, I think Robert Rodriguez, one of the main things he wanted to do was have this character live up to its name and reputation, and
the
because
good
we
side of
see
that
him
reputation, not the boat
yeah, the good
paddle
side,
thing.
yeah, being this bounty hunter,
Yeah.
that people hyped up and loved even before they saw The Empire Strikes Back,
Right.
um, and and him finally getting that moment to shine, and he treated this episode as if we were never gonna see Boba Fett again.
Hmm.
He was like, "I'm not gonna rely on somebody else down the road
Yeah.
to give him this moment, like, I'm gonna give it to him right in this episode." So he even extended the action scene and
Right.
everything with him, so,
Just an
um
interesting point, knowing that he's now involved in Boba Fett,
yeah,
Book of Boba Fett.
yeah,
Thinking about it that way, but maybe it's just like a frame of mind thing. That he's treating it the first time like it might be the last time. Even though he might at that point he might know that it's not the last time at that point. But
yeah, he
it's
might,
kind of like
yeah,
putting yourself in
yeah,
that frame of mind. To deliver
mhm.
the do or do not frame of mind.
Yeah, and for a while with some of the Star Wars stuff we were seeing, in the first, you know 3 or 4 years with Star Wars being with Disney and everything, like, I felt like they were just holding back a little bit, like, on some things that they could have just, like, went for it, you
Yeah, I
know what
feel
I
that
mean?
too. Yeah,
But I felt like they held back in certain instances, and
yeah,
I think this shows that they're just going for it at this point, you know?
yeah,
Um, and I love it, and yeah, and for the first time, I thought this was interesting, they actually shot on location for this episode,
yeah.
um so I don't remember where exactly they went. I didn't pick up on that detail, but they were on location for this episode. Very cool stuff. And Tamura Morrison actually got on the guitar a little bit as well and
Yeah, that
came up
was
with
really
his
fun.
own
Yeah,
tune.
and he wasn't half bad.
No, it wasn't bad at
Yeah, he
all.
wasn't half bad.
No.
Sang a
Um
little bit of Mando blues.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was good stuff. So then we had my favorite director to pronounce his
Yeah, you
name.
got it.
Um, Rick Famuyiwa,
I love it.
was the was the director of chapter 15, and, they mentioned that this is the first time that another human being sees Mando's face,
Yeah,
because, we know, IG-11 did at the end of the first season, but, um, Rick Famuyiwa kinda mentioned that he's deciding what his code really means to him,
right.
and protecting this child is at the center of that code. So, he's willing to do whatever it takes to even put down his former code, for his new code, which is basically, "The child is my
Yeah,
priority."
right.
He's my new code, basically.
Yeah,
So I thought that was interesting. And when we reviewed this episode too, Adam, I mentioned that this episode went a little bit deeper, and it went beyond just kind of the black and white of good and evil, and got into some of those gray areas. And that's something that
right.
he intentionally wanted to do, was explore that. Um, so he also said that inside of Star Wars, which is a lot of action, you can have this quiet slash tense scene between people with competing agendas. And I thought it gave us one of the best scenes, one of the best acting scenes and tense moments in the entire series, was when we see,
Yeah.
we see Din Djarin, and we see,
Migs,
the Imperial
Mayfeld, right.
officer, and
Yep.
then Mayfeld,
Hmm.
kind of having that tense conversation.
Yeah.
And, one of my favorite moments from this episode that we got to see a little bit more of was, um, the how the Slave One, how the
Actually
cockpit
works. Right.
inside,
Yeah.
how it rotates,
Yeah.
um, when it takes off, so the passengers stay upright.
Right.
John Favreau had kinda said, "No one has ever seen what happens inside that ship when it rotates," and we got that look in that episode, and,
Yeah.
um,
Still looks
that
pretty
was really
uncomfortable
cool.
for a pilot, laying on his back to take off and then, and
Yeah.
then rotating. Passengers kind
Right,
of get the better
right.
end of that deal. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, yeah, it was very interesting because I mean, it's something at least I have thought about, when I see Slave One in, Attack of the Clones or, whatever. So how
Yeah.
does that actually work, with stuff that is sitting in the
Mhm.
back?
Yeah, it
But now we
was
know.
really cool.
Yeah.
It was really cool. And then back to what you mentioned about miniatures. I
Yeah.
thought this stuff was fascinating. They created this 5 foot, scaled light cruiser, miniature model for Moff Gideon's ship,
Yep.
and it kind of, they mentioned doing it the way George Lucas did it.
Kind of.
In a
In a
way.
way. In a way.
Um, but then what they did, they kinda did things in reverse too. They would create models, like the Razor Crest, for
Hmm.
instance, or like a bunch of, like, ties in
Yeah,
that
they mentioned that.
junkyard
Yeah,
that
in
we
that
saw,
junkyard, right? That was
and
a physical model that.
they could then photograph
Right.
and put it digitally into the background of the volume, which,
Yeah.
like,
So
blew
they're
my
so
mind.
they're
Yeah.
bringing in these man-made elements into the digital, volume,
Mhm.
making it. I thought that I think that's ingenious, because I mean,
Yeah.
you can do
Yeah.
models on a computer, and then they have thought about doing it a little bit of a different way, where you still have the models, but you're making a man-made, actual, hand-built model, and then putting it into the episode digitally, which
Mhm.
I think is
Yeah.
brilliant.
It
It
is.
gives you the best of both
It's
worlds. I think. I mean,
Mhm.
I think you notice those. I think, like, subconsciously, I think you notice those man-made details. You know, and
Yeah, absolutely.
putting it into the episode digitally, bringing it into the volume that way, I think it's brilliant.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. That pretty much blew my mind a little bit right there.
Yeah.
And then we got into the finale. We got into chapter 16, which was also directed by Peyton Reed. And one of the first things they talked about was in that duel, between Moff Gideon and Mando. The energy that Giancarlo Esposito, and the fury was a word that was used, this fury and
Yeah.
energy that was brought into the dark saber duel.
He's on
Um,
another level.
Yeah, and they needed actually, like, a bunch of backup
Yeah.
Darksaber props, because I'm guessing he was breaking them.
Yeah, he's
and stuff.
going through them like Daniel Radcliffe goes through Harry Potter ones.
Once.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, so I thought that was interesting, and man, what a great actor Giancarlo Esposito is.
yeah.
Tremendous. And then this was interesting with the Dark Troopers. I don't know if you knew this or not, but they actually,
Didn't know it before I watched. Yeah,
in the story, they kind of went from having people in them to then them just being completely robotic.
yeah.
But
They went
in
with
action,
those Mark III versions of it, which were
yeah,
totally droids. You
totally
know,
droids.
but in
But
reality,
in reality, when they were filming it, they had humans
yeah,
in them when they could have just made them digital or something like
right,
that.
right,
But they wanted to have humans inside these suits
yeah,
to do certain movements and get certain performances out of them and everything,
yeah,
with some visual effects added later. And yeah, they showed a little clip from the Dark Forces Star Wars Dark Forces video game that was
yep,
released in 1995. That was kind of, I'm guessing, the inspiration between
yeah,
the
yeah,
for the Dark Troopers in this season.
yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah, so that was cool. They're bringing in video games and everything like that too.
Oh yeah, they're pulling from everywhere. Dave
Hmm.
is that. That's why Dave is involved. I think he's pulling, and John, John knows this stuff too. But Dave is like the walking encyclopedia. He's pulling. He's just having fun at this point.
Yeah, yeah. And I loved seeing their John and Dave, their interactions on set when
Oh
they would
yeah,
discuss things about whether they should put this in or not put this in, and
like
Dave would kind of
the
get the audience reaction, and
like John
yeah.
wanting to have Mando say McClunky after he
Mando
shoots
say
out the light.
McClunky. He's like,
Yeah.
"Can he use McClunky? Should he say it? Should he say it?" um, that was great stuff.
Yeah.
And then we got and I thought something was gonna come before this, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Um, we see the Jabba's palace set. So it was
Yeah.
a set that was created, based off of course, the palace in Return of the Jedi, and it was built practically. And Bib Fortuna was actually played by Matthew Wood,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
also happened to play him in the Phantom
In
Menace.
full
He
makeup
played
and
Bib
costume
Fortuna.
there they talked about with
Yeah.
the contacts and the
Hmm.
makeup and the fingernails and a fat suit.
Yeah, and speaking of the fat suit, they made him look that way intentionally to show kind of the gluttony of
Hmm.
being on that throne, and then
Right.
you're just on that throne all the
And they
time.
talked
You're
about the Gamorrean,
gluttonous. You're looking.
yeah, gluttonous, yeah, definitely. And
Mhm.
then they talked about, I remember back in the trailer we saw those Gamorrean guards and they were skinnier that were fighting. And
Yeah.
they talked to, fans were talking about that. These ones are skinnier than
Hmm.
the ones in Jabba's palace. Well, they were.
Yeah,
They're trained to
because
fight. The other ones
these ones are
are,
fighters. Yeah.
yeah, and the other ones in Jabba's palace are not. They're part of that
Hmm.
too.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Just all the details.
Hmm.
But but we had one thing that was noticeably absent from this Disney gallery, and that was Luke Skywalker's return at the end of the finale,
I actually
and
texted
how
you
they
and
made
I
that
was
happen.
like,
And
did
yeah.
I actually miss it? Because like first time I was kind of helping my daughter with some Christmas toys and stuff. So I was like, okay, maybe I just zoned out
Hmm.
for a few minutes and I totally missed it. So I rewound like 20 minutes back, even though I knew it was
Yeah.
way it would have been way after that. And then I texted you. I was like, did I miss it like twice because I watched this twice?
I was like, "No, you didn't miss it. He was nowhere to be found."
Yeah,
I have a more cynical view of why why that was left out of this. You know, and I don't know. I just feel like because there maybe was some controversy around the appearance of Luke and maybe a little bit of backlash. I don't think there was as much backlash as I thought there would be about his appearance, but there was some.
there's a
Um,
tiny bit. I think most of it was
yeah.
overwhelmingly positive.
It was
Aside
actually
from
there, yeah.
some commentary about how it looked,
Mhm.
from me and you and other people as well.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think they and to their credit, they talked a little bit about Ashley Eckstein with
they did. They mentioned her.
with
Mhm.
Ahsoka, and they talked about that. They didn't specifically come out and say this, this is why we didn't want to go that route. But they did mention her,
Mhm.
so they're not really shying away from that, I don't think.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
Go ahead. So explain yours, and then I'll jump in.
Well, I just feel like sometimes Disney, Lucasfilm, maybe they shy away from taking a direct approach to controversial things. Like, I noticed for Rogue One when there was a lot of uproar about some of those scenes that were taken out
Mm-hmm.
that we got to see in the trailer that I even mentioned earlier. Um, when during the Battle of Scarif, when Jyn Erso was seen taking the plans like across the
Right.
you know the terrain and everything in some of the trailers, and we didn't actually get that. Um, we saw no deleted scenes on the Blu-ray ever. We've never gotten deleted scenes from that movie. And then with Rise of Skywalker, there was also a lot of like, what's the JJ cut? Is there
Yeah.
additional
Right.
scenes that we should see? No, absolutely no deleted scenes on the Rise of Skywalker Blu-ray. And now, with this a little bit of controversy surrounding Luke's appearance with the de-aging technology. I mean, because you have people out there doing deep fakes on YouTube, and for me personally, I think sometimes the deep fake looks even better than what they did with this. Um, and now he's at that whole thing is absent from this documentary. So that's where my mind went. But Adam, yours of
M-
course went to
m-
a much more better place than my
Yeah, a
mine
little
went.
bit. I mean, so first of all, I hate that that wasn't part of the episode. For me,
Hmm.
that actually brought down how I felt about Disney Gallery, this version of it,
Yeah,
considerably.
agreed.
So for me, looking at the episode as a whole, it hurt a lot.
Hmm.
For me, that
Hmm.
was one thing I was really looking forward to seeing, and we didn't get it at all, and that was rough for me. So in that respect, it's not really positive coming from me.
Hmm.
Why I
It
think
is
it,
disappointing.
yeah, for sure, and why I think it didn't make it. I think it was honestly a secrecy thing.
Hmm.
The team that's editing and putting this whole documentary together is not going to be the same team that's editing that episode of the finale. I think to kind of keep everything as tight as they possibly could, I think it was just kind of kept out of there for that reason. Mark Hamill talked about keeping this secret for a year, and I think
Hmm.
one of the reasons why they did that, kind of like with the child, how they kept the child out of marketing, out of toy
Hmm.
production and all that stuff, to keep that secret. I think no Luke in any of this is kind of the same thing. Kind of trying to control who has access to that information at what time, and everything else we got this season from Ahsoka to Boba Fett to Bo Katan. We had those rumors and those leaks and stuff.
Hmm.
Luke was the only thing that was maybe from just a you and I or standpoint, like people who are like super into this stuff, or like going for the news and all this stuff. Luke was the only thing that was a total surprise this whole year, and I think
Hmm.
for me, that's probably why it was kept out of this documentary, just to kind of control who all knew about this before it came out.
Yeah, and I much prefer your theory to mine. I think it makes a great deal of sense about the secrecy. And at first I was like, well, wait, they put Ahsoka in this documentary, they put Boba Fett in this thing, but you mentioned how, um, and even John Favreau and Dave Filoni recognized that the Luke Skywalker thing was kept a secret.
Mhm.
And maybe this was part of that plan. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So that information didn't leak. So yeah, I totally
Yeah.
buy that. So yeah, maybe I just hope at some point we will see um
I hope,
you know
yeah,
s-
yeah, maybe that's a
something
Star
more
Wars
about
dot
how that
com.
was done.
Yeah, maybe that's a Star Wars
Hmm.
dot com thing. They'll put up in a blog
Maybe.
post or something.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm curious to see if we ever get anything on that, and I'm curious to see if they're going to try to improve it all, or improve it at all, or make it look better.
I mean, they
I
took
don't
out
know.
Gene's guy,
Um, they did,
so
yeah.
possible.
We'll see. Yeah. So I loved. I absolutely loved Luke's return in this episode. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah,
I
no,
was
I
so
totally agree.
excited. I
Totally
just
agree.
wish that
My only
he just looked a
reservation
little bit better.
was the
Yeah.
look, same as you. But
Mhm.
everything else I
Yeah.
loved the original music. I loved that original music for
Mhm.
him.
Oh, yeah. It's playing through my head all the time now, you know?
You're living in your head rent
So
free, as the kids say.
pretty much. But yeah, anything else on this Disney gallery for season 2?
I did.
All right, well, I think that wraps it up.